Welcome, everybody. This is live from DocuSign. I'm Larry Kluger, lead developer advocate for DocuSign, and we're all here today to talk about the Good Code Hackathon, and also I'll be discussing in particular an introduction to the DocuSign APIs with a focus on the DocuSign e-signature API. You are welcome to ask questions, make comments, use the comment box, and we want to hear from you. I already know this material, so I'm interested in your questions. Let's get started. We are doing the Good Code Hackathon. Excuse me. We're doing the Good Code Hackathon this year. Okay, 2 ways to win. The first is for you to create an application that includes map and approved geospatial data for conserving the chimpanzee habitat for the Jane Goodall Institute. The second way to win is to build a web or mobile app that automates and connects agreements and e-signature processes for a nonprofit of your choice. And the key for learning more about all of this is DevPost. So make sure that you go to DevPost, DocuSign2021.devpost.com, where we've got all the information and lots of resources, including the prize information down here at the bottom of the home screen. If you're interested in the Jane Goodall part of the competition, then you want to particularly look here under the Resources tab, where it is discussed in detail. And that data just went up, I believe, today, in fact. And so this is all new information with the details that you need. The deadline for the hackathon is August 13th of this year, and I wish you the best of success. So let's talk a little bit more about all of this. As I said, you want to look here for all the details and note the Resources tab for the Jane Goodall Challenge. I have some pro tips for you, in particular with regard to the Jane Goodall Challenge. And again, if you have any questions about this material, please let me know. The first comment is that you'll see a reference in the challenge information about 2 different sets of people: the people who operate the GIS system and the decision makers and chimpanzee experts who are making decisions, making agreements, drawing on the maps, things like that. And so you want to remember that the decision makers and the chimpanzee experts, that's the one category of people, they don't have direct access to the GIS system. Also, make a note that what DocuSign does for any document submitted to it, including PDF documents, HTML documents, any other kind of document, any document that's submitted to DocuSign, the documents are converted to PDF and they are flattened. So if you're in fact submitting a PDF to DocuSign and the PDF includes some of the more fancier features that PDFs can have, such as, I don't know, imagery that can be moved and panned or zoomed, or forms or anything like that, all of that sort of information will be flattened. Now, we do have a conversion that goes from PDF documents that includes fields. Those fields can be turned into DocuSign fields. But if, for instance, the Esri GIS system creates a PDF where you can pan or zoom or something like that, that will not be possible once it's processed by the DocuSign system. Next thing to note is that DocuSign has a draw tab type, which enables the signers to actually draw on the document and make notes through annotation. And that can be of great use, I believe, as part of the Jane Goodall Challenge solution that you come up with. And lastly, I want to particularly mention that DocuSign envelopes, documents, recipients, and maybe there's a couple other objects as well. They include metadata support, where your application can submit information, and then later on it's available for your later processing of the envelope once it's signed or been reviewed or whatever. Okay, so and these tips in fact may be of use to you whether either challenge that you decide to enter. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is an introduction to the e-signature API. And let's start off with the fact that there isn't just one DocuSign API, there's many of them. And you can use any of them for your solutions and for your entries into the hackathon. The one that I'm going to focus on today is the e-signature REST API, which is used to obtain signatures and review documents and so forth. Okay, you've got two choices for accessing, not just, in fact, the e-signature API, but for several of our APIs, you have two choices. Your application can directly access the API, and these APIs are REST APIs with JSON requests, JSON responses. This is all pretty straightforward stuff these days. And we have many, many developers who directly access the API. If you want to, you're welcome to do so. We also have many developers, in fact, it's about 50-50 these days, where they decide to use one of our software developer kits. And we have SDKs for all these different languages. Now, something I want to note about the iOS and Android SDKs, a couple of things. Number one is that those two SDKs are oriented towards a use case where the DocuSign user will be logging into the mobile device and then sending an envelope, signing an envelope, things like that. Both SDKs, both mobile SDKs, also include the feature that the mobile can be completely disconnected from the internet, and the SDK can still be used to review and sign transactions. And then later on, when the device is reattached to the internet or again has communications with the internet, those transactions that were completed can be easily uploaded to DocuSign. So that's all one category of comment about the mobile SDKs. The other category of comment is that you don't have to use an SDK on the mobile devices. If you want, you can, especially if you have a use case that's of a different nature than what I just described, you can make direct API calls from the mobile device and then show the results. If it's a signing ceremony, you can show that in a web view. If it's data, then you can, of course, just exchange the data back and forth to DocuSign. Let's talk about some terminology that DocuSign uses, and this also will help you understand how transactions are put together for our e-signature product. We start off with an envelope, and you can think of that as the transaction, and it goes through a life cycle, and that's the focus is envelopes. Now, the envelopes can contain multiple objects and sub-objects and so on. There's, I think it's over 100 different objects that can make up an envelope, counting also subsidiary objects and tertiary objects and so forth. And all of these are documented in our Developer Center. I'm going to show you that later. Some key objects that you need with an envelope is a document and recipients. And then recipients are associated with their own tabs, which we also call fields. So let's talk about each of these. A document, and all these are one or more. So you can have one or more documents. And the documents, we can accept many different formats. And there's other aspects of documents. For instance, a document can be part of the envelope, but only shown if the signer, when the signer clicks on it. So that's an associated document. Then we have, and we can take HTML documents, PDF, of course, Word, all sorts of different document types, but they'll all be changed to PDF. We can also take images, specific images, image types, JPEG, PNG, and so forth. Okay, next are recipients. There's many different kinds of recipients. I'm going to discuss those next. And recipients own their tabs. So for instance, one kind of a tab is a sign here, which is where the recipient would sign, would actually put their signature onto the document on a particular place. And there's many other types of tabs, and we're going to cover those as well. So a little bit more about documents. In particular, the documents that I want to mention here is a couple things. One is the PDF form conversion. If you end up with a PDF that's got PDF form fields in it, we can convert them automatically to DocuSign fields. The second thing to say about documents is that we have a feature which I recommend where you can turn on the document to be responsive. When it's responsive, that means that the document, when it's viewed on a mobile, it will be reflowed so that you only have to scroll up and down and not left to right. I see that there's a question from JR. I'm glad that you're here. Your question is it possible to integrate the Android or iOS SDK into a React Native project? I don't know the answer to that. I think the first thing to really decide is what is your use case? Because if you want the document, if you want the user to log in with the SDK, then that would be a good solution to investigate further. But if what you want is for the signer to look at a document and then decide if they want to annotate it or sign it or whatever, then you would not want to use the SDK. In general, the idea is that people who sign envelopes, who sign documents, they don't have a DocuSign account. Instead, if I want you to sign something, I have a DocuSign account. I send it to you, the envelope and documents for you to sign. You just open it up and start signing. Or we can also do it what's called embedded signing, where you come to my website and you then at some point push a button that says I want to sign, and then you get redirected to an embedded signing experience, but you don't have a DocuSign login. And the SDKs are aimed at DocuSign logins. The iOS SDKs, and Android. The other thing I would say about this is you want to investigate whether the iOS and Android SDKs, whether they support the drawing tab if you're going to use that. And again, the alternative is to use essentially a web view and show the signing ceremony hosted by DocuSign coming through the internet and then displaying it as a web interaction. Okay, so please make a note about the responsive option, and usually you want that on. Okay, so let's talk about recipient types. We have many different types of recipients. The all-time favorite, of course, is a signer recipient. And the signer recipient can fill in various fields and tabs and so forth, and also, of course, sign the document or documents wherever is appropriate. We also have carbon copy recipients. They get sent an email or, in fact, or an SMS, either way, that tells them they now have a copy of, they can now view a copy of the envelope and its documents. Certified delivery is similar to carbon copy, with the difference that DocuSign will first get a positive acknowledgement from the person that that it's being sent to, that they are ready to look at the document. and then the document or documents are shown to them. So with a certified delivery, you're not just sending a copy to someone, but rather more than that, you know that they've received a copy of that of the envelope. And then we have these other types of recipients, which if you have questions, please ask in the comments. And I see there's another comment here. Where's my mouse? It's occluded. Okay. That was from JRRR thanking me for seeing his comment. And like I say, we're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit more about recipients and signers. There's a very important concept with e-signatures called authentication. And that's the issue of how do you know that someone is who they say they are. And this issue of authentication, we can address it in many different ways. At a very basic way, if we send a document and an invitation to signing to somebody via a particular email address or a particular SMS, and you already know who's attached to that email or SMS, that gives a level of assurance, a level of authentication. You may be immediately saying to yourself, that's not really so strong, because after all, emails, many people share email boxes. What does that really prove? Same you could say for SMS. And so depending on the use case, depending how important it is to know exactly who is signing and to assure yourself of the identity of that person, we've got many other options. They're all built into DocuSign. So you just select through the API and any of these other levels of authentication can be applied. So what are they? Well, there's a telephone call. There's KBA, which means knowledge-based authentication. That's where the signers first ask a number of questions from their credit report. And if they know the correct, if they, for instance, are shown several different street addresses and they're asked which one are you associated with, that sort of a thing. There's also the idea of a shared secret. So that's where, for instance, you, the sender of the envelope of the transaction, you're the sender, you already know the signers, let's say the last 5 digits of their driver's license, or in the United States, the last 4 digits of their social security number, things like that. So if you already know that, you can tell DocuSign what that access code is, and then and then you tell the signer, when you're asked for the access code, put in the last 4 digits of your driver's license. And that way, again, you're trying to increase the level of assuredness of the person who's signing is who they say they are. Okay, we have ID verification, which is rather cool. And what happens there is, I hope that didn't date me by saying it's cool. So what happens with ID verification is that the signer is asked to display their government-issued ID, driver's license, passport, in Europe, a national ID, things like that. You hold it up to your mobile, and then we get a high-resolution photo of it. We then have machine learning and AI and that sort of good stuff, which actually both verifies that the ID seems correct and real, and also looks to see what is the name on the ID, and checks it all out. And that even works, in fact, whether you use a mobile or a desktop computer. If you use a desktop computer, the signer will be asked to take out their mobile, and the session transfers over to the mobile very easily, no download needed. They take the picture, all that's done, and then the session transfers back to the web browser on a laptop or whatever. So that's ID verification. We also have e-notary, where there's a notary public, and that's in various states within the United States. We also can do a video interview. That's a digital certificate that's issued on the spot by a company, ID Now, and they only do that after completing a video interview with the signer. And we can also make use of digital certificates obtained and presented in different ways. Okay, so this is signer authentication. Now let's talk about tab types. Within our DocuSign application, these are also called field types. So again, the most popular one is the sign here, where you mark where the person's going to sign. We also have initial here. We also have system-generated tabs, such as the date signed and the full name of the person. We also have data input tabs, and those are very useful. And that they enable the signer to put data in. So there that you can have them put in a specific a date. They choose the date, or email address, checkbox, and so forth. And something else that is relatively new, and it should be on my list here, but I need to update the slide, is the draw tab. So if there's a draw tab on the document, then the signer will be invited to, if they wish, draw on the document, and then that becomes part of the document. And that's what we talked about under pro tips earlier. In terms of gaining data, having the signer put in data, we've got a number of different field types that can cover a lot of cases. So that's a checkbox list, drop-down list, radio group, text, note, which is larger, and so forth. We also can collect money, and that's can be very useful. And that's what we call the payments tab, and we can also calculate taking from various other fields if they're numeric, and calculating what the final amount is, and then asking the signer to put in their credit card information or check information and pay money. We've also got Notarize that applies to the signer authentication. We also have signer attachments. That's where the signer can upload a document, and then that becomes part of the overall envelope. And that, depending on your use case, that could be very handy. Let's talk about templates. So the big templates have a couple big advantages, features that can be very useful depending on the use case. The first is that what is a template? It's a freeze-dried envelope definition that can later be easily used by your software to create envelopes. And remember, that's a transaction. And the template, instead of including specific people, includes roles. ROLES type of roles. And so that means that you can have a role called, I don't know, approver, and another one called scientist, and then they will do different things depending on your use case and how the template is set up. Now, the big advantage of templates, if they fit your use case, is that the templates can be managed by your business person, by the non-programmer. And what happens is that the non-programmer can go into DocuSign's web app, excuse me, and use the graphical tools there to move around the different tabs and signing fields and substitute in a new document, things like that. And then later on, your software, your application can make use of that updated template without any changes to your software. So that can be very valuable rather than trying to hard code in all these different aspects of the envelope transaction. Instead, you can drag and drop and do things using our web application, and then later your program, your application, then just sends out envelopes based on the template. We've got two large categories of achieving signing. The first is what we call remote signing. And what that means is that the signer is going to receive a link via either email or SMS. And when they open up the envelope, when they click the link and so forth, they then go to DocuSign and then DocuSign authenticates the signer at the first off at the minimal level of the email or SMS number, and then the signer goes through the DocuSign signing experience, and that can include additional authentication checks depending on what you, the sender, what you've decided. So with remote signing, first off, remember there's no need to download any application, whether you're using mobile or a web browser. And so this works very nicely. But if you have an application that people want to interact with, then you often want to use what we call embedded signing. With embedded signing, the signer is using your application, either a mobile app, or somebody asked about I'm forgetting Google's new framework. It's not Flipper. It's something like that. Anyhow, or React Native, whatever. The person's using your application, or it's just a web app that is powered in the back end by Python, Flutter. Thank you very much. Or the user is using your web app that's powered on the back end by whatever, Node, Python, C#, whatever is your favorite drink of choice. And they're using your web app. They're going back and forth with your forms and your screens and everything else. And at some point, they're ready to sign. And they either push a button or you just say, okay, next step is to sign. It doesn't matter. And then the next, what next happens is that the signer sees the DocuSign signing ceremony, and they see the document. And if you've got responsive turned on, then it's flowed, and then they sign. And then when they're done signing, it's back to your application. And so, depending on your use case and how you want to design things, embedded signing can be very useful. Couple of things about embedded signing. Number one is please don't embed it in an iframe. You run into all sorts of problems, and instead, what I very much recommend is that you either redirect. I'm talking now regular web apps, not native apps. You redirect to DocuSign. DocuSign later will redirect back to you. If you want to try and use an iframe, you can, but people run into a lot of problems with basically closing the iframe. And we have a feature that doesn't work in an iframe. That's the ID verification, where you hold up your passport or your driver's license to be scanned and then approved. That doesn't work with iframes. So I recommend again iframes. If you really want to do an iframe, you can do it minus that ID verification feature. And what else I want to say about embedded signing? I think that's the main thing. Let's talk about authentication. So with authentication with embedded signing, your application tells DocuSign what authentication your app has already accomplished, if any. For instance, if your app registers users, then that means that when they log into your app and then later on your app presents the DocuSign embedded signing ceremony, then your app already knows who the signer is because they logged in. In other cases, there may not be any login, and that's okay too. If you want DocuSign to further authenticate the person, we can do that for you. And most of the authentication methods that I listed earlier are available through embedded signing. Finally, at the very bottom level of is the which one gets used. There's an attribute on the recipient that says whether it's going to be embedded signing or remote signing, and that attribute is the client user ID. If it's set, then it's going to be embedded signing. Let's see here. Okay, so a demo. Now there's really sort of two demos. There's like I'll say 1.5 demos I want to give you here. The half demo I want you to do on your own, and it's quite straightforward, and you won't have any problem. I just want to point out where it is and how it works and so forth. So what we've got here is the DocuSign Developer Center, and you developers.docusign.com, and what you first want to do is create a developer account, and there's no charge for doing that, no credit card, no nothing. It lasts forever. So that's your very first important step. Now, the account that gets created, it has many features. It doesn't have every feature. So if you need, for instance, to send an envelope via SMS with remote SMS signing, that feature is not turned on. To turn it on, send a message to our support group, and they will turn it on for you. And in general, there's other, if you run into a feature that you want to use and it's not on, then we can turn it on for you. Okay, so the thing that I want to point out here in terms of examples, here's information about our various APIs. If we go to the e-signature API, there's different ways to start, and the what I want to talk about in terms of code examples is Quick Start. So what you do with Quick Start is, or I'll tell you first what Quick Start is going to do for you. What it does is after you log in, it creates a client ID that's using the OAuth terminology inside of DocuSign, and in our documentation, instead of saying client ID, we often say integration key, as it does here. But the better way to think about this, the standard way, and what it is, because we use it for OAuth, is the client ID. So what happens is we're going to automatically for you create your client ID for you in secret and configure everything. And then you get to name your application. You pick your language, any one of those 6 main languages, not at this point, not the mobile SDKs. And then you download a application that's already been configured for you. And this application lets you try out lots of different API calls. So you can do this on your own. You won't have any problem. The second thing, so that's a half demonstration, because it's very straightforward and works very well. Another demonstration, this is another half that I want to point out to you, is the demonstration apps that we have. And now I just have to find them. Here we go, sample apps. So we have a number of these sample applications that show, again, is another way of showing various use cases and styles and ideas and so forth. And for all of these are actually live apps. And so, for instance, if you want to do my real estate, that's a rooms one. So like this one, my HR, which I've not run myself. So let's see what this works. So you can log in with your DocuSign account. Okay, I'll do that. All right, here's one of my test accounts. And I'm being asked for consent, standard part of OAuth. And then I hit accept. And then I can say, do any of these things. I can update my direct deposit information. This is all fake, of course. It downloaded my picture from my DocuSign ID, from my DocuSign login. So now what this application is doing, it created an envelope, a transaction, and I'm going to hit continue here. And now I can put in some fake information like that. These are fields. And then, the percentage must be equal to 100. All right, let's see, total percentage of allocation. Okay, percentage for the first account. I'll say 90. Percentage for the second account is 10. So you can see that this number was being calculated. That's using a formula field. And now I can sign, and there you go. And then I hit finish. So the good news about this application, and now I'm back at the application. So what you just saw there was embedded signing, because I was in the application. I then went over to DocuSign, and now I'm back at my application. So, and now it's showing the results here. And so the source for all of this is available, and that can give you many ideas as well. So those are sample apps. And then the last thing that I want to show you, as part of this, is our GitHub. So that's github.com/DocuSign. We've got lots of code examples here. We've got the SDKs are on the package managers, but they're also on the but the source is here. So you download them from the various package managers, but if you need to do something with the source, you can have it here. So one of the examples is one that I wrote, is a React example. So I'll show you this. And so I log in. And now the reason why I didn't have to actually log in is because I already have an active login on my browser here. And that came from when I logged into that other application. So I'm also presenting some information. I didn't bother downloading the picture. I just downloaded the person's name and their primary account or default account and the account name and so forth. And now if I want to send an envelope, I can do that. And this is remote signing. So the success here is that this envelope was sent out. And the envelope won't be signed until someone logs into larry@worldwidecorp.us, receives the link, and then actually clicks on it to sign the envelope. But what we can do in the meantime is get the envelope status, for example. And so that comes back, and I'm just displaying the JSON. And you can see the sorts of things that are being tracked here. So the current status is sent, and we're going to talk about that more. And what else? This is who the sender was, right? And I'm not displaying the recipient information. That would be a second API call if I wanted to do that. So this source for this is available as well, of course. Okay, that's code examples -React. And pull requests are always welcomed. So that was some quick examples. I'm going to be finishing up pretty quick here. I want to just talk about a couple last sort of, again, core things to know about and think about. The first is that we have state machines for both each recipient and also for the overall transaction, the overall envelope status. So starting with the envelope, created means that it's a draft envelope. Sent means that it's out there being going from one person to the next. Delivered means that everyone has at least looked at it. I recommend you don't worry about this envelope status of delivered. Completed, declined, and voided are very important. Completed means that it's all done, that everyone who needed to sign, signed. Everyone who needed to be sent a copy was sent a copy. Everyone who needed to confirm that they received a copy did so, and so forth. Declined means that one of the people who needs to sign declined to sign. They say, I'm not signing this. And that stops everything, and now the entire envelope is declined. Voided is when the sender decides to scrap the whole thing and voids the envelope. So let me see here. A juror has another question. Can I pre-fill some fields on a PDF that I'm sending out, such as a name and address? Yes, you can. And you can both fill out, the fields are very flexible with their protection levels. So you can make a field be required optional, You can also make a field be read-only. You can pre-fill the value for a field for any one of those. So for instance, you can put in someone's address and then offer to them that they can update their address if they need to. Or you can put in information and have it be read-only, and then the people can only see it, they can't change it. Let's talk about recipient statuses. So the first is created, which means that the recipient exists, but they're not the active recipient at this point. Sent means that they're the active recipient. Now we can do recipients using routing order attribute. We can do recipients one after the other, that's in series, or in parallel, or you can have a group of recipients, and anyone in that group can decide to handle the transaction. And you can also mix these. You can say first this person, then these next two people in parallel, whatever you want to do. Delivered means that the person is a little bit of a spying here. Delivered means that the recipient looked at the envelope, so they at least opened the envelope, saw a document, or a document was presented to them, but they've not yet completed everything they need to do. They've not yet filled in all the required fields, signed it, and so forth. So this lets you know that someone looked at a document or an envelope, and if they haven't, for instance, completed it within, I don't know, a day, then that could alert someone in your application to go call them up and say, well, do you have any questions? Because obviously they had, something happened because they looked at it, but they didn't finish it. Decline, delivery failed. That means that we got back an auto respond email. We talked about decline. Authentication failure means that they didn't pass whatever level of authentication you required. They couldn't enter the secret code or whatever. Let's talk about determining an envelope status. So one moment here, I just have to check something. So determining an envelope status, there's two different ways to do that. The first is that you can poll DocuSign and just keep asking us over and over again, what is the status of an envelope? So you can do that if you want to. What is better though is for DocuSign to proactively send you through a webhook to send you the status of the envelope at any time it changes. And so we call that the connect feature, and that's a webhook. And we can send that to you either directly, which means that you need to have a public a public internet address so that DocuSign can reach your application. So if you're behind a firewall, then you need to make a hole in the firewall, or for hackathons, people use ngrok oftentimes, things like that. So this, if you want instead to poll us, you cannot poll us more often than once every 15 minutes per envelope. Now, while you're doing development, you can do it more often, but that would not be a production-ready kind of an application. If you want to be behind the firewall and not make any firewall changes, not using ngrok or anything like that, then what you can do is put up a listener on AWS Lambda or equivalent. You can then do a microservice for queuing it, such as AWS SQS, simple queuing service or equivalent. And then over here, there are SDKs for each one of these queuing services that enable you to very easily pull data very quickly, basically using what's called long polling internet technique, and get the data over here very quickly without having to change your firewall. And we have full examples for all these, and also some videos that talk about how to do this with AWS, Azure, or Google. All right, getting down into the final bits here, the things that you want to know about. Every API call you make to DocuSign for any one of our APIs requires an access token. If you're calling us, you need a token. And we don't do any kind of sessions. So you need to get a token. And the way you get a token is by using OAuth. So we have integration keys, which are actually client IDs. And then for the cases of a hackathon, your application will have a integration key, and then you use it to get an access token. Now, how you do that, we've got 3 different ways to do that. Authorization code grant is often thought of as the standard OAuth. That's where you log in and you get the consent screen the first time, and then you do the little dance with the authorization code. And then you end up with an access token, and it lasts for 8 hours, and then you can refresh it with the refresh token. But remember that senders log into DocuSign. Signers don't have an account on DocuSign. So signers can't use authorization code grant. So if you want to have an application that presents, that creates an envelope to be signed, that application needs to interact with our API somehow, but the person sitting there, if they're a signer, they don't have any access to DocuSign in terms of logging in or something like that. So in those cases, you use JWT grant. JWT grant is something where the human is not involved. Instead, your application acts on behalf of a human. So, and then connects to DocuSign and gets an access token. So for example, you could have, you could create an account, a user within your account, and that user would be called, I don't know, I'll use a simple example, HR department. And so that login is HR department at your email address. And then that login on DocuSign, your application represents that login, and your application can then create an envelope and display it for signing by the signer. Because remember, signers don't log in to DocuSign. Signers don't have a DocuSign account. So in order to have the access token, you can act as someone else, what we call a system user, like system admin at your company or HR department at your company, something like that. Implicit grant is for when you are doing everything locally on a single page application. Your integration key can be used by any DocuSign user in any account. You don't have to associate it for the user. This really doesn't apply to hackathon types of projects. The way you manage your integration keys is through the settings part of DocuSign. So what you do, I'll show you, we can log into DocuSign, and you log in. So we're going to be done now. If there's any last questions, now's the time. So you log in to your developer account via demo.docusign.net. And I had already logged in. So again, I'm not being asked to log in again. Okay, so here we are, and we've got 2 different environments for the developer. We've got the general web app, which is how you can send documents and create templates and so forth. So for instance, here's some templates that I've created, things like that. Then the other environment that you will use is our settings environment. So you click on settings, and this is where you've got a lot of control over your account. And for instance, under signing settings, I think is, you you can set the date format and how they should, how it'll look when they sign, and all sorts of things like that. And somewhere here, let's go back to overview. Let's look for the responsive setting. Responsive. Oh, that's interesting. It's not finding anything. Somewhere here in either the sending or the signing is the responsive setting. And then for integrations, there's the API and keys. And I'm not going to do this because I would then show you all my different APIs and keys, and you don't need to see that right now. So this is where you create a new client ID, a new integration ID. If you use the, if we go back here to the Developer Center and you decide to use and try out the Quick Start, it will create the client ID for you. And so you can do it that way, or you can just click here on apps and keys, and then there's a way to create a new integration key. Connect is where you set up your web hooks so that you'll be notified when something changes. Okay, that's it. It's been a long session. I hope it's been of help to you. We look forward to your entries. We look forward to answering your questions. You can ask questions on our Hackathon Slack channel. Another very good place to look for your for answers is on Stack Overflow. And just go to the DocuSign tag here, and or of course use Google. And we've got over 5,000 questions and answers, and so you can ask your question, and we will do our best to answer it here, or as I say, the Slack channels that we have for the hackathon itself. Last chance for questions, and otherwise, we are going to say thank you so much. Oh, thank you, John. John says this is just the right level of depth to get them started. Thank you very much for your interest in DocuSign and for helping out Jane Goodall Institute, also investigating Esri. We're going to have other sessions on Esri. Let me see. We've also got other places you can ask questions. Let me show you, is on the Developer Center. I believe we have here, we've got developer training. We've got a lot of videos that talk about different things. Our blog has a lot of technical content with code examples for how to do all sorts of things. So this is our developers blog. Oh, look at that. Avoiding iframes. But then more to the point, for instance, you can do conditional recipients. You can do, you can pull data directly out of a cloud storage system. You can do responsive signing. This is one way of doing it. Adding witnesses. So there's a lot of content here, and same for videos. Okay. Yes, definitely the drawing fields is very important. I don't know if we have an example right now of drawing fields. And so that'll be something for me to talk to our examples people about. I want to say thank you again. I wish you a good rest of the day or rest of the evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks so much, and we look forward to your entries.